Shanghai GDG is a very interesting developer community.
I'm glad somebody has asked this question.
This is where the magic happens.
This is primarily a question and answer show. So if any of you out there would like to ask questions.
Hello, I'm live? Fantastic, awesome, they're telling me I'm live. So hello everyone, welcome, thank you so much for coming to our GDL session talking about Webify your game. I am your host for the day. My name is Colt McAnlis and I'm a developer advocate here working at Google focusing on web gaming. And what I want to talk to you guys about today, I want to take about 30 minutes of your time, 30 to 45 minutes, and talk about how you can make more successful games and what you need to be doing in this ecosystem that we have in order to prosper. And I think to understand that, we need to take a step back. We need to go all the way back to 2009 and take a look at the gaming ecosystem at that time. In 2009, two major things happened. Number one was the rise of web social gaming. We saw a lot of social distributed gamings coming through the cloud, coming through these viral networks, being able to tap a new generation, a new bucket of customers that typically weren't considered gamers. These weren't people that big gaming companies were advertising to or even thought that there was a market there. Number two that happened in 2009 was that we finally saw the boom of mobile gaming. Now, the mobile ecosystem had been there for a number of years, but really didn't come into its stride until about 2009. Now, the rise of these two things brought something to game development that no one had really seen before, and that was that any game developer could go out and make a very small budget game and get it in front of millions of people. Right? When you had this vacuum that was created for demand of individuals wanting content both in the social game space as well as the mobile space, it gave rise to something that none of us really expected at the time, but it really generated the indie game developer. And this is a situation where you have sort of the casual development space of just making websites or easy scripting or people who have come to the table wanting small content, coupled with sort of the high precision, high frequency game development processes that we'd seen in AAA development, as well as skill sets that had come to the world from mobile, handheld development that we've seen from other large publishers. And this really gave rise to this developer who basically became our fan icon for the games industry overnight. It seemed like we were flooded with tons and tons of stories about how individuals would spend the weekend in their garage making a game and putting it up on the web or mobile, and then turning around and making $100,000 on it in the next week. And this type of information, when received by the general populace of game developers, created what I like to call the modern gaming gold rush. We had tons and tons of developers leaving their established companies with 401ks and stock options, branching out into the world of unknown self-entrepreneurship, looking to make the next big game. And a lot of them actually had very, very good success. Now, over time, though, we have to come to the conclusion that is no longer 2009. In fact, it's 2012 now, and a lot of the things that happened back then are no longer the case. First off, a lot of the social games in these social networks have kind of taken a fall. What we've seen is that the social networks themselves have reduced a lot of the sharing and viral features that originally made those first generation of games so successful and so popular. It was very easy for them to basically flood your stream of information with buy my pink cow, buy my pink cow. In addition to that, because of the early success, we saw a huge influence and a huge pool of money come in from venture capitalists and other small game development studios, which effectively just flooded the space. There's tons of clones, ton of one-offs, everyone trying to do the same thing with a different skin to kind of keep your eyeballs and get your attention through their clicks. On the other side of the dime is mobile gaming. Now, what mobile gaming has done now, don't get me wrong, mobile gaming is doing amazingly well. In fact, I think the latest statistics still show like some 27 billion million umpteen zillion devices that are released and activated every day. But what we're seeing there is that the market and the ecosystem has been driven more by indie game developers than any other ecosystem. And the result there has been just a flood of content, just an overwhelming number of applications that have ended up in that ecosystem. And the result has kind of been difficult because large game developers, publishers who traditionally weren't in the space before, have now entered into the space and are competing against these indies for the same little 128 pixels by 96 pixel screen real estate in the promotional systems that are there. So the indies are coming to the table with lots of great ideas and having to fight against people with lots of marketing dollars. which means something very interesting, is that with the birth of everything that happened in 2009, it's never been easier or more cost-effective to make a game and get it in front of millions of people. The problem, though, is it's still just as hard to market that game and actually convince all the people in the crowd that your content is worth looking at. So what we end up with is you have a whole fleet of indie developers all making content, expecting the environment to still resemble what it looked like in 2009, when that's not the case. So what should you be doing? If you're a game developer today, how do you get your message out? How do you embrace users? How do you market your product properly when this may not necessarily be your wheelhouse? The good news is that there's a very established ecosystem that's well-versed in understanding how to get your signal out there with lots of noise in the ecosystem. And that multiverse is called the internet. So the question really for this talk, and what I really want to address to everyone here today, is what can the web teach us about making more successful games? And I'm not saying put all of your games on the web. I'm talking about learning and adapting and bringing the principles and traits of the web into your game development process and your game to make it more successful. Or better yet, what makes clicking a link and seeing a cat such a compelling vehicle for content that people continuously do it? That cat right there alone has some ungodly number of hundreds of thousands of views. That's an amazing vehicle, an amazing process. So what we're going to talk about today is 3 ways that you're going to be able to webify your game and hopefully, or more specifically, have success in making better games. The first one is going to be to ship all of your platforms. Now, there's a great story that I'm going to tell, and if the story's about you, I apologize. I was actually at a game developer conference a few weeks ago and talked to a lot of people on the floor and was just kind of getting a pulse of what game developers were going to. And I was talking to this developer who was lamenting over the state of the mobile ecosystem and how he wasn't making millions and millions of dollars like he was expecting to. And so I said to him, hey, that's cool. How are you doing in the other ecosystems? How are you doing not on mobile or in the competing mobile ecosystem? And his response was, I'm not in those ecosystems. I'm only in this one place. You can only find my program here. And I kind of stopped and looked at him like, wait, you're not anywhere else. Why are you not embracing these other ecosystems? And he says, well, I don't think it's worth my time or I don't have money to do it. This was kind of not news to me, but I definitely think it was one of the spots where I can honestly say I believe that game developers are doing it wrong. If you're a game developer and you're making a piece of content, you should be understanding that the success of your studio and the success of your content is directly related to how many people can access it and purchase it. In marketing or in sales, you call this the top of the funnel, right? If you only have 2 million potential customers and you hope to get 10% out of it, is that going to keep your studio afloat over time? This is the critical question. Should you be locking your content only to one platform? There's a great quote by a guy named Mark Cuban. Hopefully you know who he is. His comment is, make your product easier to buy than your competition, or you're going to find them buying your competitor product instead of yours. Now this is very important, right? So let's take a real world application, for example. Let's say you've got a headache. I've got a really bad headache and I'm sitting at home and I'm out of any headache medicine. I get in my car. I'm going to drive to the closest, most convenient place to get headache medicine. And I'm going to walk in the store and I'm going to pick from the things that are available on that shelf for me to purchase, right? Now, if your product isn't being served or delivered there, then there's no opportunity for me to purchase your product. Even though I may like your product, I may know your product, I may have purchased it 2 miles down the road at a different store. The fact is that right now I'm going to choose the easiest option to purchase the product as possible. So what happens is, let's say you have your content's out in the wild, and you put it on a specific platform. Well, that's fine for the users that have already breached the barrier of entry to get to your content. This is pretty easy for them, right? You just have to find a way to connect from your platform to the people. But there's a whole group of people over here who may be entirely willing to pay you oodles of money for your content. You may find your true fans here, or your connoisseurs or your collectors, who have no ability to actually access your content because they may not already be on the platform or are unwilling to adopt that platform due to various reasons. Maybe they don't want to sign up for an email, or they don't want to buy $700 worth of hardware in order to then pay extra money for your content. And really what you should be doing is, because of the fact that games are digitally distributable, we have the ability to just go and download the content. you should really be embracing the ability to allow the user to get the content directly from you as the developer. 4 or 5 years ago, this kind of was unheard of because of the avenues online. It was really hard for a standard developer to actually put their product online and sell it to people directly. And, there was lots of DRM issues out there. Console was kind of the big thing. A lot of people didn't put focus in this. But today, in 2012, is very different. And I want to talk to you specifically about a great success story. There's a game out there called Gratuitous Space Battles by Positech Games. And it's a fantastic game. It's beautifully done. It's all in 2D. And it was done by basically a little indie developer that shipped it in 2009. Now, the developer of this, Cliff Harris, actually came out at a great talk called World of Love a long time ago. And the whole point of his talk was, hey, I'm an indie. I need money. Here's how I'm going outside of these channels to market my game and get money from other avenues. And one of the big things he came to with this was that he believed dominantly that you should be allowing users to buy from your website. And in fact, if you actually visit the Gratuitous Battles website, you can actually see tons of icons there. You can buy with Amazon, with PayPal, with Google Checkout. There is a plethora of ways for you to give him your money if you already are signed in or have an established rapport or an account on file and whatnot. This is really cool because it allows him to effectively connect with his customers outside of the ebb and flow of digital distribution platforms. He can actually connect at a much deeper level. And his website goes on further to say this. If you actually go to his website, he's got a great quote. He says, "You should buy from us because of the fact that when you buy from us, I get 91% of the money, right? Only 9% actually goes to the credit card payment people." And this is really cool because this allows him to actually connect with his users, say, hey, I'm a real person, I have a real job, please buy the content directly from me. It's fantastic. He goes on further to say, if you do buy from me, I will send you pictures of cats, right? Now, where else on the internet are you going to be able to, find the ability to connect with users like this at that deep of a level? You can't actually connect with like this in digital distribution platforms because typically when a user wants your product, they have to go to some site that explains your product and accept permissions and get it from there. No, these guys over here that make Gratuitous Space Battles are telling you, please buy my product and I will give you pictures of cats. Only on the internet can you have that sort of relationship with your user. And best off, look at that. He's saying that if you give me your email and don't even buy the product, I'll just send you cat pictures. This is great. He has the ability to create an entire marketing chain, an email list, a group of people who are interested in his product and are willing to receive pictures of cats that he can then market to over time. He has the ability to have a connection with his user because they're going direct to his website that other developers can't get because they're relying entirely on a silo distribution. And with this, you have to understand that you also get other benefits. And the second thing is, from our 3 set, is that with the ability to connect with your user, you have the ability to actually talk with them earlier. You have the ability to get their feedback. You have the ability to make changes and make a product that they actually care about. So anyone know this guy? This is Michelangelo. He's very famous for carving this statue, the statue of David. Now, when Michelangelo was later in his life, he actually gave a great quote to someone that says, "Along with the milk of my nurse, I received the knack of handling a chisel and hammer, with which I make my figures." Now, for those of you who don't know the life of Michelangelo, his family actually fell on some hard times, and he, as a child, a young child, actually had to go live with his wet nurse. The wet nurse and her family actually lived in a marble quarry. The father of the family actually mined marble, which meant that Michelangelo, as a young child living in this environment, had marble just laying around his house for him to play with, right? During this entire time, he was able to go outside, chisel marble, play with marble, manipulate marble. He had a feedback loop of how to play with marble that his competitors had never gotten. He had spent more time failing and playing with marble by the time he was 12 than any other sculptors had done their entire lifetime, right? Because how expensive marble was at that time. The point of this was that Michelangelo had found that iteration in a medium resulted in better results. And the fact that he could iterate better than his competitors resulted in his success. And the statue of David is a perfect example of that. AAA game development does not necessarily follow this path very well. Now, what you see with a big budget title, typically in a console development cycle right now, is that you end up with an early prototype phase. And then you'll probably go through about 2 or 3 years worth of development cycle. And only then, after the internal development cycle for 3 years, will you actually go into public beta. Now, take a look at this. The only time that the public, the consumers, the people that are actually going to be buying the product have actually seen the product and played with the product is during this beta phase. This means that all of the feedback that they've gotten on their content has been internal only. With that in mind, it kind of makes a lot of sense that most console games always ship their slip date, right? I mean, once you go into beta, you get all this feedback from people saying that these icons are wrong, or I don't like this, or this thing is overpowered, or they stress the system in new ways, and then the ship date gets slipped again and again, or as long as they financially can hand out, and then finally the product hits the shelves. Now, what this means is, if you look at this development cycle, you end up with like a 4-year development span costing $40 million, where the user is only brought in the conversation the last 25 or 30%. Those are the people actually buying your product, right? And yet you don't actually have a conversation with them about the product until much later in the cycle. What you actually see is that they're going through this, right? Internally, they say, is this product awesome yet? If not, let's change a bunch of stuff and see if it's again. And then, oops, we ran out of time, let's ship it. The problem here, again, is that there should be a bubble in there where it says, is this awesome yet, consumer? And then the consumer says, yes or no, here's my feedback. Minecraft is a perfect example of where this went right. For those of you guys who don't know the story of how Minecraft got off the ground, in 2009, Minecraft actually went public with an alpha. And with that, you could actually buy the alpha and get the full version later. Effectively, what the developers were doing is they still had day jobs. They shipped Minecraft on the side, and they said, hey, if you're willing to pay me now $20, $25, something like that, then when the full version comes out later, you'll get the full version plus all the upgrades and all the other cool stuff. What this allowed him to do was actually find a pool of true fans, people who actually cared about the product early in its development cycle, that are willing to pay for it and then receive feedback from it over time. Right? The result of this was actually amazing. In 2010, they actually shipped their beta, and funny story, the actual company was founded in 2010 when PayPal actually suspended their account from the alpha purchases, when it ended up with like $700,000 in there. PayPal actually thought it was a hack. Some piracy was going on. Something bad was happening. And they had to found their company in order to, properly receive these funds and tunnel them into development properly. The cool thing about this is that users were paying the company to provide feedback about their product. In any other medium that you want external feedback, you usually have to go pay someone else. If you want a consultant to come in and tell you how your blinds should be shaped, or you want external writers to comment on your new manifest, portfolio, whatever it is, you usually have to go find these people and pay them for their opinion. Game developers were paying Mojang to give their opinion to them. This is a completely different ecosystem that gamers are willing to justify. I'm willing to pay you and tell you how to make the game better. That's fantastic, and the results show themselves. In 2011, the PC and mobile game actually shipped, the stable versions, and they actually had so many people that loved the game and did so many things, they had the Minecon convention. How many games do you know actually start from nothing, build a community, and actually have a convention that ships a couple years later? Today, it's reported that Minecraft has over 9 million sales and has lots of SKUs cross-platform. This is a perfect example of shipping early, getting feedback from users, and then creating a success story from it. Little known fact in the mobile ecosystem, Angry Birds was actually the 30th game that Rovio shipped in 3 years. That's actually a great statistic. 30 games in 3 years. What Rovio was able to do was able to ship games quickly, receive feedback about them as a unit, as a product, right? Like, they didn't have the time to do a full cycle and say, how do you want this game to change, and do that for 3 years with their customers. They would basically make a product, get information, ship it quickly, receive as much feedback as they can from that, incorporate that into the next product that allowed them to be featured once again in the mobile ecosystem, right? Because that's how it works in mobile right now, is it's easier to get a new piece of content featured than it is an existing piece of content. So for them to stay on the top of the charts, they had to keep pushing out new products. And Angry Birds was a result of that. They were able to get feedback and incorporate it quickly. A more recent example, a game called Temple Run, was actually the 11th game in 4 years. You should be seeing a trend here. Game developers who are shipping more games in the mobile space are getting better feedback cycle with their users. And then game developers in the PC space and the web space are able to have better connectivity with their users and get more feedback sooner, allowing them to make a better product over time. And the cool thing is that once you have the user's attention, once you're able to distribute to them from all the platforms, once you're able to actually get them in a dialogue from you, you'll find that one of the most important things that you can do is get them into your product quickly. And this is probably the most technical discussion we're going to have today about Webify your game. And it's a concept of instant on. If you read the papers about the internet, you should know that the internet is ruled by a law of 3 seconds. And that is that a user will abandon a website if it isn't loaded in 3 seconds. A perfect example of this, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, there was a company called Google who had a very amazing search engine. And they actually asked their users, would you like to see more results per page? Would you like 30 results or 10 results? Overwhelmingly, of course, the users of the search engine said, please give us 30. When they implemented it and got all the engineering done, what they found was that their click-through traffic actually dropped about 20%. And they didn't understand why, right? They implemented what the users want, but yet they were losing traffic. When they went back and looked at everything, they noticed that the extra results caused a half of a second delay in the site loading. Half a second in delay was resulting in 20% of the users just abandoning the website. The internet is a consumer's market, right? They understand that data is everywhere. And if I think that your site is slow and I know that I can get that data somewhere else, I'm just going to exit your site because I feel I can find it faster than waiting for your slow site to load. This is the rule of the internet. It's the law. And there's tons of papers that have shown personalities and studies that reflect that, yes, 3 seconds is the limit there. Now, there's a great quote that shows that this actually affects game developers as well. There's a great quote from Rich Hillman, who gave a fantastic talk at New Game in 2011. He says, increasingly, the capacity we are arguing for with our customers is not their money, but their time. Rich understands that the important thing to do now in the ecosystem that we're in now with gaming is get the user's time, because the time will result in the money, right? A long time ago with console, the most important thing to do was get the money, because then the time came afterwards. Once I had your purchase, you would then spend 30 hours playing my products. But that was because the ecosystem wasn't as saturated as it is today. Now, game developers are fighting for nuances of attention that the user can spend with their product. And if they can get your attention and make you a user, they know that they can make you become a customer. So now game developers have to respect the user's time. This is a great example. Anyone know this game? This is Mass Effect 2. Probably one of the largest criticisms for this game was actually their elevator loading screens. This was actually had a huge uproar on the internet. Lots of people were very critical of this. In fact, one of the most common forum posts you could find is, oh my, OMG, WTF, what about these loading screens? I could go make a cheeseburger and come back before the next level was loaded. And what you saw here was a very negative uproar to long load times. Now, the internet has seen the same thing in practice. There's actually been research that finds that users who experience slow load times for a website are more likely to complain to their friends about the experience, which means that you've not only lost a current user, you've actually lost another potential user who may view your site as not worth their time. In fact, the uproar for Mass Effect was so large, a very popular web game comic blog-ish. I don't even know how they even define themselves anymore. Anyhow, Penny Arcade did a comic on this where they basically said, this alien civilization has died from the ecosystem and I don't know what happened, but I have an idea. It's probably because they all died in the elevators waiting to go from floor to floor. And basically what happened is, for all the people who had never played Mass Effect 2, and this was the only experience they got, was Penny Arcade saying, wow, the load times are too long. That was a whole pool of customers who have now been negatively influenced simply because of load time. And it's important to understand that load time is a technical problem. It's not necessarily a design problem. Design can hide the technical limitations, but in reality, what you're doing is you're fighting through multiple stages here. First off, you've got some medium, be it a compact disk or actually hard drive, that needs to get transferred into memory, and that's typically limited by the transfer rates of the medium to memory. And then from the memory, you've got to get it back over to the GPU if you're doing any sort of rendering, or even just transform the data into some form that your system's going to use. So loading up binary trees or spatial hierarchies or A-star pathfinding, all that data's got to be processed. And so for you to have something like instant load times, to get your product to actually load in 3 seconds, you have to optimize each one of these scenarios independently. Another great example is a game called Half-Life, and this was probably one of the first that came to the table with a unique solution. So for those of you who've played Half-Life and the series sort of following Half-Life 2 and Left 4 Dead and all those other ones, you'll notice that at the end of a level, you'll typically have about 400 foot worth of additional space for you to just kind of run. And there's no monsters there, you don't know what's going on, you're just jumping over some crates and running up some ladders. But then all of a sudden you'll see this screen, which is that little loading blip, and that loading blip will come on and then disappear. What the artists and designers and programmers at Valve were able to do was actually add extra geometry into the environment. And when you would hit a specific trigger point, they would be able to start loading in the next level of content while you're running through these extra 400 foot. The result was that you would only see that loading blip for a very small amount of time. Rather than having to go through a full level load, they were able to predict what you were going to do and how you were going to do it and start the stream earlier because they knew that the medium of getting from disk to memory was the slow part and that they could hide it with design. So the question we have overall in Instant On is, can your load times be under 3 seconds? Can the gaming community as a whole adopt this feature of the internet? Can your game be Instant On? And what I'm not talking about here is Instant On only from disk to memory, right? So if you're actually doing digital distribution and the user goes and purchases your content, they're going to have to wait around for your content to be downloaded. I'm not talking about Instant On after this point. I'm talking about Instant On from the user saying buy, thank you, or clicking a link, or getting a referral, or having the ability to access your content for the very first time, all the way to actually being able to play it. Can they do that in 3 seconds? Now, if you're not getting your product to your user through a digital distribution platform, then really the avenue that you have to look at is how you can get content to your user through the internet, right? Now, you'll notice each one of these arrows kind of has already a ton of literature out there on how you can optimize that, and how you can make load times from disk to memory faster, and memory to GPU, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But what really hasn't been talked about, because it's not been really conquered yet, is how you can increase or decrease load times from internet to memory. So let's talk about that for a second. So let's say you have a user who sits in the United States and he wants a piece of content. Well, so that content will be on some server sitting in some basement of some dude's house, and that content can be shipped to them over the intertubes. The issue is once the user ends up far, far away, that the ability to get that content quickly diminishes. And this is because of two factors, bandwidth and latency. Now, bandwidth is typically what you pay for when you actually go to your internet service provider. They usually have some sort of package system and they limit it based upon throttling and all these other things. But what they're talking about is buying bandwidth. The second problem, latency, you actually can't really control that much. Latency, or the speed of latency, is actually limited by physics, which is actually limited by how fast light can travel over time, or over distance, which means that even though you are buying a 100 million speed connection in America and they have a 100 million speed connection in Australia, that data is going to hit a limit on how fast it can get to those guys across the globe. How this is fixed is by duplicating that data. So rather than allowing that data to sit on only one server, you allow it to be duplicated in Australia so that it can actually get to that user much quicker. Now, this concept is actually duplicated in a lot of places, and you can actually see that by duplicating the data across many data centers, you can get it to users all over the world very quickly. Now, this is, at its core, a content delivery network, or CDN. This is sort of the backbone of the internet, the ability to distribute content to people quickly because it's duplicated in lots of places. So as a developer, if you want to get your content, you're selling it worldwide, if you're selling your game, you need to make sure that you're using CDNs to distribute your content. Now, there's some interesting properties with this. Let's talk about load times again. So let's say that you're a AAA game and you have 1 gigabyte of content. That's actually going to take about 7 minutes to transfer on a 20 megabits per second connection. So if you got 1 gig, you want to get it to a user, that's 7 minutes of their time that they're going to have to sit around and wait. So if you assume, just naively, that 1 gigabyte is uncompressed, then your first step to say is, hey, well, what if we just simply compress this data? How fast can we get it to the user? gzip is a very standard compression. It's supported by most web servers as well as web browsers and the zlib library and lots of other things. That'll actually take a given set of 1 gigabyte content and get it down to about 330 megabytes. That 330 megs will take about 2 minutes and 12 seconds to transfer and decompress, because we have to take into account the time to actually decompress the data, right? Now, that's fine, that's great, but can we get lower? If you look at the internet, there's actually some new cutting-edge compression algorithms out there. One of them, probably my favorite, is one called LZ-HAM. And that'll actually take that same 1 gig of data and get it down to about 204 megabytes, which reduces your transfer time and decompression time to 1 minute and 18 seconds. Now this is good, right? We're starting to see that as your data gets compressed more, it can come to the user faster, right? But let's take a look at another thing. We're using CDNs. There's an implicit cost with using a CDN. So let's say that you've got some super successful web game. And let's say at your best, you're doing about 3.4 million unique users a day. These are people that have never seen your content before, coming to your content for the very first time and receiving your content. Now, obviously, this is a worst case scenario, because if you get 3.4 million users every day coming to your game, you probably don't care about transfer times, but that's a separate discussion. So if you're actually transferring 3.4 million users a day, 1 gigabyte of data is actually going to cost you about $9,600 to get that data to those users every single day. With compression with gzip, that actually cuts down to about $2,900, right? So you see the number of bits crossing the wire reduce the costs involved with distributing that content. And of course, LZ-HAM then cuts it down even further, getting you to about $1,900 a day. So that's actually still a lot of data and a lot of cost, right? If you have 3.4 million users, you have to actually take a look and say, do we need to ship 1 gigabyte to a user before they're allowed to see a pixel on the screen? And I'm sure if you look at your assets and you look at your design, you'll find that that's not actually the case. You could probably actually get a much smaller subset to your users, allow them to see the content quickly, and then stream in the rest in the background. Which is the concept of you should only be sending to users what they need. What's the minimal amount of data you can send to them, especially if you're paying for it, right? If you have a user who's not paying for your content, let's say you have a freemium app or there's a trial application or something like that, these users are connecting to your servers, downloading your data, and you're paying for that transfer for someone who may not be paying to you. And so you want to minimize the amount of data that they receive that comes out of your pocket. There's a great example of this, a very successful example. I hope you all know it. It's called World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft came out with a great streaming demo a while ago called TryWow. And what TryWow did was effectively bundled the first 25 megabytes of the World of Warcraft experience into a single package, a single executable that the user could download very quickly on a 20 megabits per second pipe that actually came down around 10 seconds or so. And then after that, while the user was configuring their character and learning a little bit about the game, they were actually streaming in the next 20 hours or so of gameplay and caching it locally on the disk. So the user only actually had to grab 25 megs first, then they could start playing the game, and then as they started progressing and experiencing more content, they would get the larger and larger pieces of content coming down. This allowed the developer of World of Warcraft to kind of balance what content came through the pipe, how much cost did it take them to acquire a new user, how much they were losing to people who were trying the game but not actually purchasing the content, etc. They had a lot more data because they were segmenting their content properly. So now if we assume that 204 megs that LZ-HAM was compressing our gig to, and we tried to bundle it up like this, let's say 24 megs went to 2 million users a day, and 172 of that megs went to 1.4 million users a day. This actually changes your scale and your cost quite significantly. The 24 meg is actually going to cost you $132 a day. And then you're going to pay around $700 for the 172 megs. The total is about half of what you were paying by sending a gig to every user. And this is a very successful strategy. It allows you to also understand your content at a deeper level. It lets you care about what your users are experiencing how they're experiencing, and what data is needed from your studio to get them the right vision of your message, right? It's like taking a blog and compressing it into 140 bytes or 140 characters so you can get your message out to the people. Now, there's a great game that goes even further than this, and it's a game called Realm of the Mad God. Hopefully you've played it. It's a fantastic product that's up on the web. And because it's a web game, these guys have actually optimized in a different direction. Their entire game is a 1.29 megs. That's the whole product. Effectively, it's a fantasy MMO shooter online, right? So you've got tons of people shooting bullets at each other and dodging. It's really cool. The point is that with that 1.29 megs, if they distribute that to 3.4 million unique users a day, that costs them $12. So they've taken a very unique approach to the problem. How small can we make this product? Because load times matter on the internet. It takes about 1.3 seconds to transfer and boot up Realm of the Mad God the first time you've played it. And if 3.4 million users are getting that content every day, it only costs the developer $12 to ship that content. This is a great intersection point of understanding transfer time plus cost ratios. And this is where you're going to have to start optimizing as game developers. If you want your content to be available outside of the digital distribution platforms that you have today so that you have a deeper, richer conversation with your consumers, you can get feedback with them earlier, You need the ability to have your game load quickly, and the cost of scales involved with that are minimized. There's a great quote, and I'll leave you with this. It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change. This is a great quote about evolution. What we're seeing in the games industry right now is a very evolution-based moment. We've got tons and tons of little organisms out there all fighting for life, trying to stay stable, trying to create their own little niches and ecosystems, and some will survive and some won't. Your product, your game, your studio, in order to be responsive, to sort of last out this time of change, you need to be willing to adopt new technologies, new standards of development, and think in new ways to reach your customer. And that is the basis of webifying your game. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. We'll go to questions here in a minute, so once they kill the live feed. Again, I'm Colt McAnlis. This is how you get a hold of me. Go webify your game. Make things awesome. Thank you very much.